One.
Okay.
Should we get the party started?
Got it. Let's get rolling, Colleen.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third session of Professional Practice Online Learning. It's such an honor and a privilege to be hosting this session. My name is Colleen Simrosen-Watt, if you don't know me, and it's my pleasure this morning to introduce you to Sandy McDonald, who's been superintendent of Grand Prairie Public Schools for 8 years. And not only has Sandy rocked the educational world in his division, but he's also had a fair share of adventures serving on Zone 1 Executive and Zone 1 Director on the CAS board. When he's not busy being a superhero in the education realm, Sandy can be found indulging in his passion, researching effective school divisions, engaging in generative dialogue, and using collaborative inquiry to improve his system. Not only is Sandy an educational genius, but he's also a part-time magician. Watch in awe as he pulls a rabbit out of a hat during this presentation, leaving us wondering and questioning the very fabric of reality. Prepared to be astonished as Sandy unveils his secret talent for levitation. Yes, you heard that right. He can float above school corridors, effortlessly gliding from classroom to classroom, providing on-the-spot support and inspiration. While these talents may stretch the limits of reality, they add an extra touch of enchantment to Sandy McDonald's impressive bio. After all, a little bit of magic and wonder can ignite the imagination and inspire educators and students alike. So get ready to embark on a journey of professional practice standard implementation with the legendary Sandy the Magician McDonald.
Now that is an introduction, Colleen, that has me standing about 2 inches off the ground. Thank you very much. I am standing, and so you just have to take my word for it that I am levitating. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. It is a great day in Treaty 8. The traditional CAS land acknowledgement is on the screen for you to read. We're coming together from all across the province, but myself and my team are here in Treaty 8 territory. You could have been anywhere you wanted to be in the world today, and you chose to be here with us, and so I really am grateful. At the recent CAS annual learning conference, we were sitting and we had the opportunity to listen to Chief Willie Littlechild, and he used a phrase that our Deputy Superintendent, James Robinson, who's with us, has adopted into his territorial land recognition, and I'm co-adopting it along with him. The phrase that we're all treaty people has always stuck with me because of the implications that we're all part of the treaty applies equally to all of us. But Chief Littlechild described us as treaty partners, which is a little more meaningful than treaty people. And when you're a partner to something, it speaks to responsibility. And so I really like that, and I am co-adopting it and choose to add that to our land recognition. Land is important. It's important to everyone. It's an important part of the First Nations culture. Right this morning, our friends from the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation, just about 45 minutes away from Grand Prairie, they're all off their land and they're in hotels in Edmonton, scattered across about 15 or 17 hotels. And I choose to acknowledge the land we're meeting on. I choose to recognize our friends and what they're going through right now. And that is my contribution today to reconciliation. Now we've got a little bit of a starting point here in chat, and Colleen's going to talk a little bit about what this series is all about. And
Thanks, Sandy.
Your answers in chat.
Yeah, so some of you have been with us through all 3 professional practice standard online webinars. And we'd like to start with just where are you at with all of this information? So our question for you today is to describe how your school authority assesses the implementation of professional practice standard. Feel free, we're a small group, feel free to unmute your mics or write in the chat. How do you assess the implementation of professional practice standards?
This is an excellent question, and maybe someone from our team can mention how, can put in chat how we our directors visit our schools once every 4 to 6 weeks, meet with the school team, talk about their growth planning, their professional learning efforts for the year, and maybe James, Kim, or Corrine could mention some of the standards that, or some of the competencies that we look for evidence from our conversations, just an affective way to measure that. And just while everyone's racing to their keyboards to put something into chat.
I'll start, Sandy. Thanks. One of the, so Kim and I are partners and we visit and support 9 schools. One of the really important competencies that we focus in on is number 6. The last 2 to 3 years in our division, instructional leadership is critically important. I mean, it's important for all of us, but that's one of the competencies that we have really worked a lot with our school leaders and in our own practice, being very intentional in our communication, being intentional in our modeling, taking a look at specific indicators. This last couple of times in our visits, the 6 of us as a leadership group have determined that we're looking for specific evidence around some indicators in 6 and some indicators in 2. And so we're listening for that evidence that a school leader would describe in their practice. So that's one of the ways that we support that.
Thanks, Corrine.
Good morning, I'll jump in. One of the ways in which Holy Spirit assesses the implementation of professional practice standards is really through our collaborative response model at a divisional level and at school levels. And so as a senior administrative team, we have worked throughout the year to get into the schools. We head to our schools in pairs of 2, and each of our visits focuses on a specific area connected to our priorities, which are connected to those professional standards. And much of our we're currently working on a continuum of supports that is framed within those professional standards. And so a lot of our visits and our conversations and our stories of practice that extend into our learning leadership meetings are framed around those collaborative conversations. And that becomes our vehicle to begin those conversations.
Nice.
Thanks, Crystal. A lot of overlap there with kind of how we do it. Just different words, but very similar process and outcomes.
Also next, our Prairie Catholic here. We have a fairly new leadership team, and as this is a fairly new mandate, we start with a conversation going through and trying to define what those standards are. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? Because even though they come with indicators, I find that there's a lot of discussion around what exactly are we talking about here. So we start with a lot of what does it mean? Are we all on the same page? And then sometimes, because there's a lot of those indicators, we go through a little exercise within the context of whoever we're talking to, either trying to maybe combine some of those indicators or prioritizing them. Let's get to the heart of the standard instead of worrying about A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then we kind of work on providing exemplars within the context of each person's situation. And then we've moved into this area too. It's just kind of a repeat with our leaders, but we also talk about what is it that we deem important in our division, or what do we stand for? And then we try and put that into the standards framework. Where does that fall?
A lot of overlap there too, Jesse, and some of those things that you described, you're gonna see evident in our presentation. Colleen's question in chat, do either of you use any tools? One of the things related to what Jesse just described is, that is a tool for us, is if we've redone all of our leadership at the school or system level performance evaluations to be completely based around the competencies. And then we've created a standard kind of process for engaging in conversation about each of the competencies. So if you're when I'm or James or I are conducting a performance evaluation for a principal, there's 9 competencies in the LQS. We set aside an hour and a half for each competency. So at the end of that performance evaluation, it's based on over 10 hours of conversation about evidence related to the indicators.
Interesting. Any final wrap-up comments relative to this discussion? We will engage in another discussion as this session progresses.
I just want to ask Colleen, because this is where we are, and it's already been said, but we have a very new admin team. And I think for me, the word that jumps out here is the assessment piece, because, I'm finding it as a challenge as a newer superintendent, that when we're looking at the professional standards of practice across TQS, LQS, and I'm just going to focus in on the LQS, that the hardest part of it is the assessment. And working with the team so that they understand, because again, when you're looking as an outside set of eyes looking in, there are people that can talk the talk, but they're not walking the walk. And so the key word here, and that's why I'm really interested to hear, Sandy, as you've moved through this, is the assessment piece. Because how are, because I'm challenging them right now I'm trying to create the time and space for our school-based leadership to come together. We look at the competencies, and then we go through them. And especially if you look at instructional leaders, it's what's the data that's actually proving that you are an instructional leader, that you are actually moving practice forward. It's the assessment of it. And I find that piece is we're just unpacking that right now. And so I'm very curious about that, because it's the data. And as we're having conversations, if it's one lens looking from the top in, it's more of a challenge, because you need a whole view to see the actual assessment of those practices, the standards being implemented.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about a little bit of that, but Kim had her hand up.
Well, maybe I'll jump in later to see if you talk about it, but really what Corinne was talking about, when we're visiting our schools every 4 to 6 weeks, part of that inquiry is them identifying their evidence that supports the work they're doing around the LQS. So 18 different schools, 18 different focuses, but they're identifying evidence, qualitative and quantitative, that we're coming back to every 4 to 6 weeks to see how they're moving forward with their specific goals that they've set and their curiosities they've set. But part of that is very much them identifying that evidence, and that's part of our conversation every time that we meet.
And by then looking for themes and patterns, you can see in any one conversation, any one person can talk that talk. But when you see it over time and you see the quality of the evidence, I think that's when you get a sense for how real it is. Corinne, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just one thing to add, Sandy. Shauna, one thing we've noticed, as we all know, it's evolved over time. And so our conversations, I was a principal 2 years ago. And so my conversations 4 years ago as a principal and my evidence looked vastly different than what I see now from our school leaders. And even if I was still in the building, what I'd be demonstrating and what I'd be showing as that evidence would look vastly different. It's been this evolution to get where we are today. That's been really critically important. And again, it's about that intentionality that we all have. That's been very important. And in our communication, it's been a journey for sure.
Thank you. So we are going to be talking about 4 areas today in terms of this presentation. And I'm going to start on the first one, which is to talk about the research that brought us all together. And the research that brought us all together is 4 universities who came together to conduct research around implementing Alberta's professional practice standards and looking at that realm of optimum learning for all students. So initially, this particular study was designed to assess, deepen, and extend the implementation process of the Alberta's 3 professional practice standards. And you're probably aware of this as well, but we are very unique, not only in Canada, but the world, in that we have 3 professional practice standards. The Superintendent Leadership Quality Standard is very, very unique. And so the fact that we have 3 of them, and there are through lines within those 3 in terms of what's happening for the competencies, and we're all channeled to be looking at that optimum learning. And I liked what Corinne said, it's a journey, it's an evolution. But what we heard during the CAS conference was that the principal investigator, Sharon Friesen from the University of Calgary, said that there's a visible shift from awareness of the standards as policy to standards in action. So across our province, superintendents and system leaders are grappling with, how do we get there? How do we use these standards to get to optimal learning? And we are working certainly towards that point. The 4th year of this particular study has been published. And you'll see in this particular slide that there is a realm of evidence, a realm of documentation that they've used to get to where they've landed in terms of, what does standards in action look like? So there were 35 school divisions that were involved in this, and you'll see that I've circled the 10 case studies. So Grande Prairie Public is one of those case studies that we're going to hear about today as we progress through this journey. And the other thing is, not that any of you have any spare time, but if you're ever looking for something to do, if nothing else, you could use the document for weightlifting. No, just kidding. It is a massive document, but have a look at what they've used in terms of their research sources. There's some interesting research sources towards the end. If in fact you're looking at any of these elements of, how do I make this work? And how do I steep this in research? It's already done for you, I think, in this particular document. So Sandy, if you could hit the next one, please, and thank you. So it is with pleasure that I introduce you to Grande Prairie Public's case study as to what they've been doing in terms of implementing professional practice standards and what they did through COVID. And one of the things we heard loud and clear from Sharon Friesen is the districts who focused on student learning and COVID was in the background are the districts that actually have worked and are working and are achieving a closer level of optimum learning, because COVID never stopped them. They kept going. So it's on you, Mr. Magician McDonald.
All right. Thank you, Colleen. So I've got about 20 minutes to kind of go through the origins of our story and the evidence, Shauna, that we had. A large part of it comes from our participation in this study. 20 minutes is way too short to tell this story. So I've put my email and my cell phone number in the chat. If you write it down, if you have any questions, send me an email, text me, and we can schedule a chance to go into it in greater depth. or you can talk to Corrine or James or Kim who are online here and get their story. So it's a simple story. It's a simple origins. It's complex. You know how complex your organizations are and how complex our provincial and local systems have become. So there's going to be lots of meat left out, but I just want to try to boil it down today. When I started as the superintendent, we had grown an awful lot. I want to tell you how we reacted to that. I want to make the thinking behind our planning visible. I want to make a few connections to both the LQS and the LQS throughout this presentation. And I really want to highlight two things. Sharon Friesen's research was really, really important, is really important to us. But you're going to hear us or hear me, and if you talk to people on our team, hear them talk about LQS 6 and TQS 3. That's how we refer to building a body of professional knowledge and providing instructional leadership. And those are at the core of everything we do. SLQS 7 and SLQS 4 are also part of my work and James's work, but oh, my mouse. So 2016, 2017 was my first full year as superintendent. We'd had this tremendous growth. We had a pile of relatively inexperienced, relatively young school leaders, tremendous background as teachers, just kind of getting their chops. I first learned in this year the work of Dr. David Townsend, Pam Adams, and Carmen Momberket from the University of Lethbridge, and the work they did with collaborative inquiry and generative dialogue at the CAS Fall Conference. And they just, what they shared about how divisions were talking more about instruction and instructional leadership just resonated with me. I also knew what we largely didn't do with respect to the teaching practice, the TQS, teaching quality standard that existed. So we knew that the professional practice standards were coming. We had all of these pieces, and then we heard about something called the Alberta Research Network, and that was the first round of grants, and they put some calls for proposals out, and we were talking with Pam already about how we might work together to support the capacity development of our school leaders and ourselves. And through their graciousness, they brought us into a project they were already talking to the Foothills School Division and Lethbridge Public about. And the idea was creating awareness and capacity in school leaders for the implementation of the leadership quality standard. So we were very fortunate to get funding through the Alberta Research Network to bring Pam and Carmen and their colleague Sharon Allen up to Grande Prairie for 4 or 5 months. And we worked through each of the indicators and each of the competencies with our school leaders. The goal was to build their confidence and to start them down the road to thinking about continuous improvement in their competence. And that key word, that conscious competence, is something that's been present throughout our work in this regard. We already had a structure where we had embedded an evidence-based professional learning model into our practice, the old PLC, and we still have people who refer to our professional learning time as PLC. But that work of Helen Timperley really was a foundation, the use of evidence. Shawnee, you talked about hard to assess. It's hard for classroom teachers to identify evidence in short cycles of their students' growth. And so we've been working on that for years, and we will continue to do so. But that gave us a place to start. And so my experience through all the growth was we wanted to continue to do what our team knew to be the right work, right? To talk more about teaching, talk more about learning, talk more about instructional leadership, move away from managing. But we also wanted, because of the situation we were in, for it not to be perceived as ad hoc. We wanted people to see, our people on our team to see and then be confident in the kind of the research base and the approach that we were taking. So the Center for Educational Leadership out of the University of Washington has a model kind of based on Timperley, a touch of Vivian Robinson, that describes how you can create a theory of action for leading change. And so this slide really just shows it. In short, what this slide shows is that if you want to make a change in student outcomes, and you want to positively affect a change in student learning, you start with the students. You start by identifying what their needs are. Once you have a good sense of that, then it's the principals and vice principals who are responsible for meeting those teacher needs. So once they know what the teachers need, then we have to look at what our school leaders need. And then we design our professional learning to support them so they can support their teachers, so they can support their students. And at the green kind of table at the bottom of this slide shows how that works. If central office does X, principals will be able to do Y, teachers will then be able to do Z, and all students will learn at higher levels. And so there's a lot more to that, but just in general, that's the theory of action. That's the theory behind the plan we've designed. And I'll point out on the upper right-hand corner of each of these slides is a reference to one of the indicators, just trying to show, this is how we connect it. We talk about these things in our division. When I do a presentation at the start of every principals meeting, when James Kim or others on the team are doing the same thing, we make reference to those relevant practice standards. So with that theory of action in our back pocket, this is the physical representation of how we're actionizing that theory of action. And this too, again, not wanting anybody to see it as ad hoc or something that we've just thrown together. This too has a research base. This coherence framework comes from the Public Education Leadership Project out of Harvard University, and the work of Dr. Richard Elmore was really key to this. This is an anchor that when I put this slide on just now, I saw Kim smiling, I saw James and Corrine cringing. I'm going to show you why they had those visible reactions. But in the year we implemented this, we were doing town halls. It was the first 2019, 2020. And we were starting the development of our new 3-year education plan. My team and I would be going school to school to school. We got through 15 of 18 schools before COVID shut us down. And I'd throw this up and say, here's how we've structured our division operations. So I'm here in your school, your teachers, your educational assistants, your frontline staff. You exist in the center of this diagram. You're at the core. You're in the instructional core. The success of our students does not depend on me. It depends on you. And we all know that, right? The biggest school-based factor that influences student achievement is the instruction the students receive. The interaction between the students and the teacher as they work together to master the curriculum. That's a belief that we wanted everybody to own. We've got our theory of change, we've got our 3-year education plan, and then underpinning all of that is the culture, the structure, all of the people that make up our division. And I talk about this all the time. And I'll throw it out now and I'll say, you know, we've got this visual representation. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I said these 3 concentric circles. Everybody cringes. That's really describes how we're trying to affect a change in student outcomes. But unbeknownst to us at that time, this was a godsend through COVID, because outside those circles is the external environment. And the way we describe those is that's where all the things are done to us. You know, the provincial budget, it is what it is. That's done to us. Curriculum change, that's done to us. COVID, that's done to us. And we referred to that through COVID as saying, yeah, we can't control what's done to us. Myself, mostly our board, they influence what's out in that external environment. But when we're at work, all we can control is what we make, is the decisions we make at the very center for kids. And over time, you know, as I went through those town halls, I would say it's almost a shame that it's a 2-dimensional figure, because it should be 3-dimensional, because everything's built on the bottom, that foundation, and then at the instructional cores right at the top, at the pinnacle. And so on the right-hand side, you see a child's toy, a visual representation of this. Kim Frickus made me that. I'll treasure that until I leave here. And on the left-hand side, one of our professional support staff, the leader of our RCSD team, Cheryl Brown, she's a glass artist, and the day after I was in her school, she went home and she made a 3D representation. And so it's part of my culture for sure, but I really believe it's part of our culture as well. And this slide is a poor slide, but that's what you see there. That's a 10-foot tall wall. That's just outside my office. On the other side of that wall is where our education team meets. We call it our Ed Collab room. We do our planning and we hold meetings and stuff like that. Our 3-year education plan, 3 priorities, 7 specific outcomes, and our kind of map for getting there. So we've really tried to be visible about how and what we do all of this. And then comes the opportunity to participate in this study. And we had some talks about whether or not we wanted to do it. 4 years of surveying teachers and leaders, 4 years of focus groups. We hemmed and we hawed, and at the end of the day, we said, well, we're all in on this work. Let's participate in this. And it just gave us some tremendous feedback. You know, survey participation the first couple of years was low, because we'd be surveying teachers at the end of the year. And I was worried about response rates, and Sharon would tell us, no, it's okay. Don't worry about that. But out of this, over the course of 4 years, we got feedback from the answers our teachers provided. And we saw the response rates grow as well. Teachers and leaders are moving towards a sustainable professional practice guided by the practice standards. They gave us the explicit feedback that they're working or they're embedding these practice standards into their work. But of the most value, though, was the focus groups that we had. And so, you know, it's in the upper right-hand corner, you see indicator from the Superintendent Leadership Quality Standards, building their capabilities and holding them accountable for providing instructional leadership. You know, that's something I take very seriously. I have to report to my board on that. These case studies, these case study reports, these focus groups, they gave us that kind of evidence. And there's three quotes right out of the report. Teachers, so Sharon, the late, our good friend, the late Jim Brandon, and Sharon met with teachers, vice principals, principals, system leaders, and then with James and I. So they did a lot of interviews. At the end, people were talking about it. They talked how it impacted their work in whatever their role was. They talked about the use of data, and in that organizational drivers, there continues to be comfort with fidelity data and increasing comfort with outcome data. You know, people are starting to get over that hump of talking about evidence. And we also saw evidence that the structures we put in place, like our professional learning Fridays, our how we restructured our school admin meetings. So we have a morning principals meeting, and then we bring all principals and vice principals in the afternoon once a month for focused professional learning time that are based on the needs they've identified in surveys earlier in the year. It's making a difference. Dr. Jennifer Turner, our good friend who spent some time in a similar role as mine up in Fort McMurray and now works for the University of Calgary, did her dissertation on used the network analysis as part of her dissertation research, volunteered to do a network analysis for us. And basically what this shows is where you can see the hubs that are highlighted there are where reference to each of the 3 practice standards exists. The networks show how people are identifying. They collaborate with people in their schools and outside their schools on their work related to the practice standards. And then all around, you can see just standalone dots that are out there. Those outliers, those are people who don't really have a network. And so that's kind of a visual representation of the work that we need to keep doing. And Sharon used this slide in a presentation she did at the International Congress of School Effectiveness and Improvement in Vina del Mar, Chile in January, where she talked a little about what our division is engaged in. And one of our directors made that comment you see on the bottom. If there's not a culture of collaboration and it's only collegial, it doesn't really matter what kind of structure there is. So purposeful, meaningful collaboration, not just collaboration for the sake of getting together. Now, what we learned and where we're going next, well, we learned how important these are to be embedded into practice. We ask our principals to not just review them in August, but to make reference to them throughout the school year. We know what, like Jesse said, you know, the importance of building that shared understanding. We know that we're moving towards having a shared understanding of what optimum learning is, and we're seeing evidence of that. And just as another piece of evidence, we've just concluded hiring, I think 3 or 4 new vice principals, couple new principals in just 3-4 years. It is astonishing to see how prepared internal candidates are to come into our division and talk about evidence of their ability to function as instructional leaders, the meaningful evidence that they can speak to. That's a really important thing. What's next? That's what's next. We're just going to stay the course. I was telling Colleen the other day, one of our schools, Pam Adams was up, and one of our schools brought her up, and we're working with her this year. And she got asked the question, listen, all this collaborative inquiry and generative dialogue stuff, do you think there's a chance this goes away when Sandy goes away? And that's been one of my mantras since day one, is I wanted this to be so embedded in our division. And people, I think, I get the sense, the evidence from our principals that we get from our division surveys that they share with various people, that they see this is going to be there forever. And 2 days after I'm gone, if they choose not to, well, then it's not mine anymore. But I really hope they don't, because we need to keep going down the road. So I'm going to be talking, we've got a planning day coming up with our team. I'm going to be talking to them. And maybe in a couple of years, we find another research partner and apply for another ARN grant. I wouldn't mind kind of revisiting those focus groups on a broader scale and learning a little more specifics. But we TQS3, building a body of professional knowledge, LQS6, providing instructional leadership. That's the work of certificated people in our school division, period. Through COVID, that was our work. A part of our leadership was to shut the outside stuff out and as best we could and manage our people and hold them close and keep them well. And then focus on what our responsibilities are. And Sharon's done some research in those areas where she has said, however doctors do their research into something like this, Sharon says, if you can demonstrate mastery of TQS3, you will have demonstrated mastery of all the other 5 competencies in the TQS and ditto LQS6. But that's for another day. What we're doing next, this is the next big thing in Grande Prairie Public. On the left is the cover page for the OLF, our Optimum Learning Framework. On the right-hand side is the table of contents. And so Crean Cruz, who's with us today, led a team of principals and vice principals. Through the year, they unpacked TQS3. What is building a body of professional knowledge? What does that mean in Grande Prairie Public? And it's in our language, it's in our words. And you see the contents of this document. How does it connect to assurance? How does it connect to our 3-year education plan? What is optimum learning? And our mission statement is every student succeeds. Talk about a natural connection. And then down at the bottom, the 4 components of quality teaching. So that's where it's in our words, our language. And next year, this is kind of done in draft form at the end of this year, starting maybe at the end of this year, more likely in August. Principals are going to be sitting down, and over the course of the year, they're going to be working through this to develop a shared understanding of the content at their school. At the end of the day, what we wanted when we started was to spend more of our time talking about and doing quality instruction and quality instructional leadership. And at the end of all of this journey, that's exactly where we are. And next year, this is kind of a vehicle that's going to get us through and get us there. Now, that's like 20 minutes or 25 minutes. We've got section here for Colleen's question. No, I'll turn it back to Colleen, but there's what we have 15 minutes left. There's time for, I think, any questions, because I'm very conscious to the fact that that's a long, complex story told in a very short period of time. Thank you for coming along on the ride.
Thanks, Sandy. I think what we'll do here is, yes, there are a couple of questions that I've put up there, which we can tackle, or just open the floor to any questions you've had relative to what you've heard in Grande Prairie Public's journey. So first of all, I just want to give you as participants the opportunity to ask your questions. Jessie.
Thank you, Colleen, and thank you, Sandy. That was wonderful, and I feel privileged to live so close to you that I can dig a little deeper over a coffee or something and certainly learn from you and your division. But my question is this, and maybe you don't have the same context, but when I look back at the data of examining our leaders in our division, for some reason, we just continuously seem to have this new group of administrators. Once again this year, I'm standing in front of my board saying, a lot of our work was directed with admin because we have over 50% with less than 3 years experience, and less than 50, or the same data for our APs and our CEC team is new. So my question to you is, if this was done kind of started in 16, 17, did you have a big turnover of school leaders? And if so, what was the impact of that?
I think we've had a fairly big turnover in school leaders, both at the principal and vice principal level. A little bit at our system level too, right? Nick Rajuco, Chris Farquharson, Angela DeBar, they're not with us anymore. Well, they're still with us. They're not on our team anymore. But the impact of it is, well, two things. One, having a structure like this, or having a theory of action and kind of an organizational vision for how we're going to do this, allows us to keep focused on the same things every year. Keep focused, keep talking about the same things. And so that builds people's capacity over time. As people have left, new people come up from the system, and we do an annual recruitment retention report to the board every year, just so they know. James puts it together with our HR department, and talks about how it's really hard we've interviewed some tremendous people from outside our division for vice principal positions, but it's really hard. It's someone really, really focused on the same things we've been doing that can come in and from outside the division pick up and provide evidence that aligns with what we're looking for. Because we're seeing our vice principals just having a completely different understanding of their role as an instructional leader, that sort of thing. So the impact is, it's a slow process. But we started, and I'll get to you just in a second, Kim, we started by what Pam and Carmen and Sharon did for us in those first few months, was we asked our school leaders to self-assess themselves in each of the competency areas for each of the indicators with respect to their confidence in their knowledge of what each of those meant, and with respect to their competence. And we did that a couple of times, pre and post, and that kind of information kind of guided our early start to the professional learning. So that's where we were identifying what do they need to be able to meet the needs of their teachers. Kim, jump in, please.
Yeah, and I'd say the other part is that structure you put together for us at central office, Sandy, and really, we all have titles and we all have portfolios, but our conversation now is we're directors of schools, and so our work really is to build the capabilities of our school leaders in LQS 6. And so if there's an email, if there's a phone call, and it's something related to that and supporting our school leaders, that's what happens before our portfolio. And so really being paired, like Corinne said, we have 9 schools between the two of us, and that's the majority of our day-to-day work now, is really supporting our school leaders. And so it comes back to that theory of change, is what do we as central office need to do to support our leaders so they can support our teachers? And that's changed our work over the last 5 years, I'd say dramatically, with what we focus on and where our time is spent.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kim. I didn't even talk about that in there, but early in my tenure, I surveyed principals. What do you need from central office to really be effective in your job? And we engaged in a process for over a year, and I talked to colleagues across the province, and I found other models. And we ended up designing an organizational structure for our system leadership team that was focused, that was a little non-traditional. For the longest time, Kim, when we'd do roll-alikes with Cass, Kim didn't have anybody to roll-alike with because her title was Director of Systems Planning. And so she had ed plans, results reports at the school and division level, and inquiry structure and system leadership structures and things like that. But that's, it's that core that we kept coming back to, Jesse, is how we tried to manage that. Corinne?
The other thing I think to add to that is our leadership for tomorrow that we designed this year. So we have a cohort of teachers that are interested in leadership, whether that's a formal leadership or whether that's leadership within their school. But this year, the 4 directors, along with James and Sandy, we've really thought about what does our system need and how do we help people move from the teacher into that instructional leadership role. And so as a participant of Leadership from Tomorrow from the days of yore, if I was a participant today, I'd be like, wow. And so we focused in on that optimum learning, and we focused in on the standards, the teacher to the leader. And so that's just been one more way that we're building and helping for our teachers to understand what it looks like to shift from instruction as a teacher to that instructional leader. And both Kim and Sandy have alluded to this. We focus in on building leadership capabilities to support teacher capabilities. And that's been a really important piece in our division. And again, moving out of the principalship into system and been along in this journey, the work it's really a big change in our division. And I always think we're shifting to the next application of our knowledge, I guess, for lack of better terms. Now we need to actionize what we've learned and what we foundationally know together.
For the next 3 to 5 years, James, you want to add?
Yeah, just really quickly, leadership in lots of ways permeates everything we do as a system. So Green is talking about our leadership, our formal leadership development programming. We've got a core group of people who work in our system too, and in our division, they're called learning support teachers, but they're responsible for providing support for inclusion and instructional practices for all learners through that lens of optimum learning at all schools. And that group in particular meets on a regular basis, and the focus is not about, I mean, it is somewhat about the technical work they do, but there's always infused in that leadership competencies and in achieving leadership competencies in the work we do as practitioners at the school level. And what we're seeing is, if we look at our most recent hiring for over the last couple of years, hiring for vice principal, a significant number of people are coming out of those roles because they've had an informal opportunity to practice leadership. They come in understanding inquiry, they come in understanding instructional leadership, and that really provides a good platform for them. And they really are, we've noticed in our interviews, the quality of candidates, the language that's being used, the perspective on leadership is just elevated significantly in the last couple of years. And that's because of the hands-on ground level work we're doing with classroom-based people or school-based people.
That's an excellent addition, James. You know, in the context of student outcomes, what we want is we want every student to have access to optimum learning, and we want each of them to succeed to the greatest extent that they can. And I also say quite frequently to our staff, we want them to succeed at a level higher than they ever personally thought possible, right? Just to set that high bar. We're not there yet. You know, we're very proud of the improvement in student outcomes that we've experienced. We're very proud of the system level increases we've seen. We've got some internal data that measures that in terms of our system as a place to work. Every year, one of the questions we ask our staff is, would you recommend Grande Prairie Public School Division as a place of employment? 95% each of the last 3 years, it's yes. But we also ask them, what's your satisfaction with our professional learning Fridays, where you get a chance to work as a school team and then you get a chance to work as an individual? And that has been climbing, and it's in the 90s now as well. And one of the other questions, and maybe some meat that we need to continue to unpack, is what's your satisfaction for teachers only? What's your satisfaction with the conversations you have with your school administrator about your teaching? And we're seeing if it's not in the low 90s, it's trending up that way. But we're curious. Okay, so you're satisfied with those conversations. What are you actually talking about? So we're going to unpack that. So for the next 3, 5, 7 years, you know, we just want to keep learning together and try to move forward. But those structures, those LSTs, the orgs, it's all part of the puzzle. Everything comes back to that theory of action. Everything comes back to that coherence framework. with the teachers, the students, and the curriculum in the center.
Any other questions for the Grande Prairie team?
I'm sure glad you guys came. Participants and the team, yeah.
Okay, well, Sandy, if it's all right with you, can we hit the next slide? And I would ask that you take a moment. There's only 5 questions to tackle the evaluation link and let us know how this worked for you or didn't work for you. We'll also send it out as a post-conference invitation. And then one more slide, please, Sandy. So some of you have asked, like, what happens now? So we've had 3 dynamic sessions featuring 3 case studies, 3 stories of practice related to professional practice standards. And so what will happen now is I will take some time to capture what we heard in these sessions and put them into learning guides. And so you'll see that when we get those published, we will be posting them in the CAS library, but you'll also see about them in CAS Connects. If you have any questions or want any of the materials sooner, just give me a quick email and I can get those off to you. So I want to say thank you to Sandy and his team for this very informative session. And please continue to connect and help us to work together to figure out as a province how we get to the optimal student learning. I think we're well on our way at this point.